And then I started working with startups and I was like, okay, I found it. Because the energy around it, the people just trying to make something good out of nothing, make something new and fix a problem. You know, it was a great environment, great vibe to be around. When I was at the big law firms, I knew that the partnership at the first law firm I went to, like big law firm out of law school, was all dudes. They'd never had a woman partner ever. I mean, this is not that long ago, you know what I mean? So, you know, it was upsetting, and I also just didn't see myself in them. At one point in the training, or, you know, in the convention, he has this little red laser reflector and it reflects off some girl's forehead. And he says, "Oh no, you're a Hindu." And I shit you not, he literally said, "Moo moo, I'm your god," at a statewide convention. Now, did I panic hire somebody without qualifications in December of that year? Yes, I did. Did I ignore red flags? Did I accept the on-face statement that this person had 7 years of experience that was immediately disproven like the minute they started working? Yeah, I did that. But, you know, you learn from these experiences, and we got through it, and now people can take leave, and they do. And we create a trusting, kind, caring work environment for the people that work here so that they can give their best to our clients, which they do. Yeah, I did it for semi-altruistic reasons because I just was like, this needs to exist in the world. And then I've been the biggest recipient of the benefits because I'm just so happy in my day-to-day compared to...
Welcome back to Be Anomalous, the podcast for the misfits, the trailblazers, the cultural disruptors, and anyone bold enough to carve their own path. I'm Sai Menon, and today's guest is someone who has spent her career helping founders build companies. But what makes her story remarkable is how she built her own company. Aravinda Seshadri is the founder and CEO of Venturous Counsel, a startup law firm dedicated to helping diverse founders access the legal resources and support that have traditionally been reserved for those already inside the right network. But her journey wasn't always linear. She grew up navigating life as a minority, became a lawyer almost by accident, climbed the ranks to become a law firm partner, and then faced a question many high achievers eventually confront. What happens when success no longer feels aligned with who you are? In this conversation, we talk about finding purpose beyond prestige, building a company while becoming a mother, overcoming imposter syndrome, creating opportunities for underrepresented founders, and why learning to trust your own voice may be the most important entrepreneurial skill for all of us. If you've ever felt like this might not be the right time to start something, and if you want real tangible advice as to how to legally start your business, this episode is definitely for you. So let's get into it. Before we dive into Venturous Counsel, I want to know what made you want to be a lawyer.
Oh, yeah, it was kind of weird, to be honest, because I was a very argumentative young individual. And so everybody around me would joke, "Oh yeah, she's definitely going to become a lawyer." And I loved I loved My Cousin Vinny. I loved A Few Good Men. I loved all the movies about like courtroom drama. And then, you know, and then when I was in undergrad, I was actually doing studies, but like I felt kind of disenchanted by how studies are conducted and how outliers are, I don't know, it just didn't feel as satisfying to me as I thought it would be. To like, it wasn't like a search for truth, it was like a search for funding. And so so I was like, okay, maybe not that. And then I basically went to law school because I wanted more options. I wanted more time. I was stalling. And then when I was in law school, back then, I mean, 20 years ago now, they only really taught about litigation. And I did not really like litigation in actuality. I love courtroom dramas, but you know what? There's so much grunt work that goes behind, and the
Yeah.
courtroom drama is like 1% of your career. And so I was like, I don't like it enough for me to do all of the other stuff that is required for you to get there. And then I also really found that the whole adversarial process was very, I don't know, there's something different about being in opposition to something versus trying to facilitate something. And I much prefer to be a facilitator. That is my natural mode. That is how I feel comfortable. That's how my brain naturally goes. So then I learned about this aspect of corporate law, which is basically everything, or transactional law, which is everything that isn't litigation. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I didn't make a huge mistake. This is something I could do, you know? And then I started working with startups, and I was like, okay, I found it, because the energy around it, the people just trying to make something good out of nothing, make something new and fix a problem. And, you know, it was a great environment, great vibe to be around. And then to have my own role in facilitating that was the best. So that's kind of how I stumbled into it.
Oh, amazing. Did you actually think that you would be an entrepreneur? Because now you're like a lawyer and an entrepreneur.
Now,
and
yeah,
that's
I
such
did
a
not.
different-
I definitely didn't. I mean, I knew, pardon me, when I was at the big law firms, I knew that the partnership at the first law firm I went to, like big law firm out of law school, was all dudes. They'd never had a woman partner ever. I mean, this is not that long ago, you know what I mean? So, you know, it was upsetting. And I also just didn't see myself in them. They either had stay-at-home wives or broken marriages, and they were all men. And like, I even tried to dress like them. And you know what? I look terrible in khakis and button downs. You know what I mean? It just doesn't look good. And so I was trying to figure out a way for me to look like I could belong in that role. And I just never did. So I was like, okay, well, you know what? Being a partner at a law firm is not for me. Then I found another firm that was a lot more focused on, you know, working with smaller startups, not out chasing the huge transactions. And then I was like, oh, this is much better. I could see a solution here. And I became a partner there, but I still felt like something was missing. And I had always cared a lot about diversity and representation. And when I was a partner, I was like, you know, putting together, you know, workshops and I was recruiting many diverse. When I left, it was the most diverse corporate practice I'd encountered. And then, you know, I was trying to give back to our own community. And that's when I realized we didn't have that many diverse startups on our roster. And I was shocked. I definitely thought that if you build it, they will come. And that only works in the movies. It turns out that doesn't really work in real life. And, you know, that's when I realized, okay, there's this gap in access. And it's not because, I don't think it's because of malice or ill intent. It's because if you're a small, scrappy boutique law firm, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of money in marketing. You just use word of mouth. But that means that the people who know about you are only the people who already are in the networks. It's really hard for you to be a new person who's doing this thing for the first time to have any idea of who is good and who is reliable and who you should work with. And so I just realized this huge gap in access. And that basically, it forced me to create this law firm because I wanted to help address that huge gap that was like unintentional, but was affecting so many small startups.
Where did this passion for diversity and underrepresented people come from? Was that something that you were like from your childhood?
What a good question. Yeah, I grew up for a while in the Bay Area, and then my family moved to Salt Lake City, Utah. I think that was part of it, because coming from an area where we weren't a majority, but there are plenty of other South Asian people and families around, to a place where there was like 100 families, you know, that were, and there was this very pervasive, very strong religious majority of Mormonism all around us. And they were very structured. They had support. People tied money to the Mormon church. So it has a lot of power in the state and even in the city. I think it made me really aware of the ways in which majority and minority, how that can rob people of resources or opportunities. And yeah, and I had always been interested in potentially going to law school. I was in pure court, you know what I mean, which is a diversionary program for juvenile, so they don't juvenile offenders, so they don't end up in the system. And I just saw that in a situation where somebody is a minority and somebody is a majority, it's just so easy, even not necessarily intentionally, for the opportunities to be skewed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So how old were you when?
This was in high school. So, they moved when I was about 10 years old. So I spent about 8 years in Salt Lake City.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think it was formative. I also I think it was tough. And in retrospect, I'm like, how much of that was because it was tough to be a minority in Salt Lake, ethnic and religious minority? And how much of it is just, if you're not going to peak in high school, it's not going to be great for anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I had to come to terms with maybe there's an element of you didn't like high school because you were super nerdy and your future was to be, doing well in college and beyond. But I do think, I'll tell you a story. I went to a peer court convention. They had only had it for a year or two. So this is maybe the first or second annual statewide convention of peer court in Utah. And the guy that was running this thing was making offensive jokes to 300 students and chaperones, and adults. And he wrote sideways on an overhead. And I remember he was like, "Sorry about writing Chinese." And I was like,
what?
And then you'll love this guy. At one point in the training, or in the convention, he has this little red laser reflector, and it reflects off some girl's forehead. And he says, "Oh no, you're a Hindu." And Sai, I shit you not, he literally said, "Moo moo, I'm your god," at a statewide convention.
Oh my God.
For peer court, for people who are volunteering to make things better for people who are otherwise in the juvenile system. And I was just my mind was blown. I that I'm not a person who is often speechless. I was speechless.
Yeah.
I was speechless. I feel like it was a formative moment. I was like, I can't believe that somebody with power is making these jokes and making it seem acceptable. And just, I went and talked to him afterwards. I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "No, I have lots of Indian friends." Well, they wouldn't have been happy with that representation. Let me just tell you, you should talk to them about it.
No one said anything? Wow.
He was running it. He just moved on to the next thing. And so, and I didn't say anything because I literally could not speak at that point. I was so shocked. And I was also a teenager.
Yeah. But, you were still young.
But I just was like, look, this is how it's even happening with adults at high levels. We got to do something about this.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, it takes a lot of courage. It's also at that young age, it can shape you to be different, but at the same time also normalize this. So how did you kind of walk away from?
I don't know. I don't know how. I guess my parents, I have strong sense of self. I was not like, "You were the problem, Aravinda." I was like, this is messed up. Everybody should know and see that. And sometimes I do think kids are more, they see clearly sometimes, without all of the justification or whatever, at the same time that I want on one hand to see everyone's humanity and see everyone as a human. On the other hand, there's just actions that are wrong, right? Every moral fiber in you says, no, this is not how you do things. And that was just a small example. People have endured far worse aggressions, microaggressions, all of these sorts of things. They're enduring it right now in this current political climate. And it's incumbent on all of us to identify where we feel uncomfortable and make actions that are in alignment with our values. I really believe that.
Yeah. So going back to starting Venturous, how did you get the courage to do that? I mean,
I was reading your post. It was right around when you started, you also were expecting. That's a lot of things that was
That
going
was
on.
crazy. Okay, look, if I had to do it over again, I would not have been on my own for a pregnancy on my own with my own
Yeah.
firm. Like, yeah, I was like, oh, if only I had waited a year. But I'll tell you what, Sai, I was super worried about not being prepared and not having the skills or whatever legally. So I left when I was like 13 years in my career, and I could have left like 5 years before. I left too late, honestly. And when I left, a lot of clients came with me, the diverse clients that I had brought into the firm. And actually, I left too late. Of course, when I had the kid, I was like, oh man, I would love some maternity leave right now. And I have another funny story to share with you, which is I had quite a bit of imposter syndrome, not actually about the legal practice, but about management. Because I honestly don't feel like I had ever been managed by someone who was a great manager in any law firm. Just that wasn't their skills. They had other skills. And you know what? In law firms, they don't necessarily train or promote based on management skills. So I believed that maybe I wasn't a great manager because I hadn't had any. So I was hesitant to hire people. And then when I got pregnant, I was like, okay, well, you're going to have to figure it out because you can't, do this all on your own. So I hired, and then as a further indication of my imposter syndrome, I did not poach people that I used to work with. I felt nervous. I don't know. I didn't want to invite them into something that wasn't going to work. I don't know. So I went and I recruited and I found somebody who was great. She just had drive. She really cared. She would work hard. I knew it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to hire you. You don't really exactly know a ton about startup, but I'm going to train you. And, within 4 months, I'm going to actually have you take over for a little while I go on maternity leave because I'm due around Christmas this year. And I was talking to her in August or something. And she's like, cool. I am due January 10th. 15 years, 15 days after I was due. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, we'll figure this out somehow. And so we did. And she's still with the firm. She's on baby number 3.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How did that not make you want to not go with her? And like, what usually a person would do?
Yeah. Well, I will say, I fully believe that women, including women who have kids, can be so efficient. Like that's something that I noticed it in me when I had the pressure of like, if I'm not here, then I'm home with my kids and I want to spend as much quality time with them as I can. The pressure to become efficient and effective and manage well and like give to other people and let them hand off, like it made me a better lawyer and a better manager and a better coworker. So I could tell she was just a person who would do really well. Now, did I panic hire somebody without qualifications in December of that year? Yes. Yes, I did. Did I ignore red flags? Did I accept the on-face statement that this person had 7 years of experience that was immediately disproven like the minute they started working? Yeah, I did that. But, you learn from these experiences and we got through it. And now people can take leave and they do. And we create a really, a trusting, kind, caring work environment for the people that work here so that they can give their best to our clients, which they do.
So you went to Stanford. How much of Stanford network did help? I mean, even though you were diverse.
How much did it help?
Yeah. How much did it help?
I think it's helpful. I mean, it's hard to identify what thing was more helpful in one area or another. I think it helped me to get into a large law firm where I could be ground into a fine powder, but also learn a lot along the way, right? It was not a long-term solution for me or for most people, but in a very short period of time, I learned a great amount of startup law by sink or swim approach. Could I have gotten into a different firm that still did startup law and learned a lot? Yeah, I could have. And if I went to a less prestigious law school, I would have had to. I think what it helped was that while I was at law school, I was able to get a summer internship here, get, some, work a little bit there, I just think it provides a lot of opportunities, but I don't think it's required. I think it's nice to have. And to be honest, the people that I know that were like the shining stars in law school, they're not always there. It's often almost the opposite people that shine in practice, right? Because the skills for being a student are very different than the skills for working and providing work product. And I noticed that there was there's very little correlation between the like order of the coif, like, honors students in law school and the people who did really well in practice. So I really think it has to do with, especially the folks that if they found something that they're really interested in that drives them, that's so much more important than getting into a fancy school. Or, I mean, of course, I have a lot of privilege to be able to say that in terms of the school I went to, but I do find that the people that I hire, I almost question the very junior people coming out of these big law schools or these prestigious law schools, because I don't know that they actually know that this is what they want to do. I don't know that they've been trained in like practical law. And so, I think it's becoming less of a value, but I do think that network is always really helpful.
So when you have to hire, you look less into the school and more into the passion towards, serving diverse people?
Well, I look into the skills, and the passion is definitely something it's what draws people to the firm and keeps them.
Yeah.
We actually have had the same team for almost 3 years. There's no law firm that can say that, to be honest. Like, everybody fired when things were bad. Everybody hired when things were good. And we really think a well-functioning team requires trust, requires longevity, requires working together over a long time. And that creates an institutional knowledge with the clients that is so valuable, and like big law firms just completely forget or don't even factor that in. Regardless, one thing I realized is that when I was at the boutique law firm before, that we were not hiring younger associates, because the management was like, we don't actually know if they actually know startup law. You can be an associate at a big law firm and just do diligence on deals for like 3 years and like not know anything about anything beyond that. And that is somebody who couldn't come into our firm and excel, right? You have to be somebody who actually understands the pieces of it, understands some of the negotiation, knows the documents, this sort of stuff. So we weren't hiring junior people, but then so many people leave big law firms who are diverse or who are women because it's inhospitable. So then I was like, well, we're just narrowing our range to a less diverse population, right?
Yeah.
And we do need people who are more junior, who can do some of this work at a lower billable rate for the client's benefit. So I actually created a test at my prior law firm to kind of assess, have you done some of these deals? Do you know what a pro forma capitalization table is? Can you explain things to clients in a way that's helpful but not scary? Just kind of practical assessment.
Yeah.
And I don't know of any other law firm that was doing it. And definitely we had people who were very like, how dare you try to assess me? But I'll tell you something. We had a 5th-year associate from Wilson Sonsini, one of the really expensive, prestigious law firms out there. He failed the assessment. He lied. He had been doing some other work there or something, and he wanted to get into startup. And he's like, I've been here for 5 years, but he didn't know basics. So, and yet we found 1st-year, 2nd-year associates who had been thrown in the deep end like me, who just ended up learning a bunch, and they could do really well. And that's somebody, I want on the team.
Oh, that makes completely, that's a great way to actually assess the people that you actually want to work with.
It's like, don't just not hire because you don't know. Figure it out. Like, there are ways to fill that information gap. Yeah.
Yeah. So, now we're working with founders on a daily basis. And one of the things that you said is that you left really late. And one common thing that I keep seeing with people too is the uncertainty and leaving their, comfort zone, because you have health insurance. And like you mentioned, the maternity leave, all of these comfort that you're leaving and going into, a startup. So how did you kind of, move around that, especially when, you were getting pregnant And at the same
Yeah.
time, now working with founders, what have you been seeing?
Well, I do think increasingly people of different backgrounds are understanding that while there are trade-offs, right? There is less security, but there's less restrictions. There's less support system, but there's more freedom. So it's always going to be a trade-off, I think. And a lot of folks often are kind of the serial entrepreneurs will start something and then they may take a little break and they'll work at a big firm with all of those securities for a little while, gestate a new idea, then they'll go out and execute on that as well. And so it's not necessarily this binary choice of like, are you going to be at a big company or a small company? It's really around, and this is like a concept I've heard more recently, more eloquently described as seasons. Like what season are you in? And if you've been in the chillax at a big firm until your board season, might be the season to try something new. Maybe you need something fresh to mix things up. But I think it's not necessarily a binary choice. And people think, okay, once I go and do the startup, like that's it. I'm just going to be a startup founder forever, 100% of the time. That's not really how it is. And people's career trajectories, you could go into academia, you could go into government. There's all sorts of other ways, right? You could start a nonprofit. But I think it really comes down to being in tune with what's driving you and what's satisfying for you in that moment. And I just really feel annoyed because I feel like, especially for women or people socialized as women, so much of our training has been to beat down that voice within ourselves, right? To like completely shut it up and ignore it. And women are often like, I don't even know what I want. How am I supposed to even know that? I'm so out of touch. And so much of my training in my late 30s and now has been around learning to hear it again and learning to get in tune and like, what does it feel in my body when I say something? Does that feel true? Does that feel false? And like having that internal assessment of my own decisions and choices and big decisions. And like, I think everybody could stand to do that. And I actually think a lot of new startups, cool startups started in the pandemic because people were kind of forced to do that.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of time on their hands and they did a lot of introspection. And people often were like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to try something I've been wanting to do for a long time.
Yeah. No, I think definitely COVID and pandemic really helped with rethinking a lot of things, like especially, Zoom meetings became more popular. Talking about the pandemic, around that time versus now, have you seen anything going back? Like now everyone's going back from remote to in office. So what changes have you seen?
Not the big firms are asking for it as a I mean, I've heard that many big companies are doing the return to office push as like a subtle way to downsize because they know it's not going to work for a lot of people and they're willing to take that brain drain and have those great people leave because they can't they're trying to cut costs to satisfy their shareholders. And so I think it's an opportunity for companies that are willing to be flexible and for people wanting to, it's an opportunity for people who want to do things on their own terms. So I will say, I thought it would be such a great pull because my firm had always, the intent was always to be remote with no office. And I thought I was so cool and smart. And the pandemic happened. It was like everyone nobody has an office. But we've remained that way. It's allowed me to hire amazing talent all over the US. We have people in Boston, LA, Seattle, Tennessee, Utah. So it's just everywhere. And I think it takes a lot more effort to create a sense of community and team in these remote scenarios, but there's so many upsides too. So, I mean, it depends on your business and what you do, but there's so many of them now where you literally could do it anywhere. Young people are these like virtual, remote nomads or they're traveling all around while they're still doing the work, which I love. And so it really just, it expands the opportunity as long as there's a relationship of trust and accountability within the organization.
Okay. Well, one of the things I saw is how you maintain a no with your clients so that your team gets the right balance of work-life balance. Being female, like you mentioned, it's really hard to kind of, say no in general. But how have you sort of trained yourself to do that, especially running such like, a firm and maintaining that client relationship? How have you managed that?
That's such a good question. So I have a story about that. I have a story. I always have a story.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, I think the way I learned it is by doing it wrong. Okay. So when I had it was my second kid, but my first kid in this scenario without any support or maternity leave or anything, I was terrified. I was worried that the clients were going to leave. I was their only point of contact until I started hiring people right before I was about to deliver. And I was pretty sure they were, I was just terrified they were going to leave. So I didn't set reasonable boundaries and did not create the space that I needed for myself. I did it bad. I did it badly. I panic hired somebody in December, and then I was still like, did not trust this person. So I was still in the hospital doing work, which was terrible. I had my laptop with me in the hospital. It was bad. Okay. I did it wrong. Is what happened. And I also have talked to the associate who joined. She did work before she should have because she felt guilty and, she knew that I was under pressure and it wasn't the right way to do things. Like you can get support from other firms. You can create clear boundaries with your clients. There are ways to do it. And the next year, having learned from that, and every year, at the end of the year, I tell the clients we are offline for about 2 weeks. In between early Christmas, a few days before Christmas to after, until the New Year holiday. Don't expect us to be doing stuff very end of the year, unless it's really urgent or unless, you let us know in advance and we plan for it. We have contractors, we have people that we can loop in as needed. We will get it done. But I still had a couple, 2 or 3 clients come up with stuff. One of them, they'd been sitting on it for a month. And I was like, you know what? I can't do it. I'm sorry. Yeah. And like, if you can find somebody else to do it, awesome, please go ahead. But otherwise, we'll handle it in January. And all 3 of those clients are still with me. They acknowledged, they heard the communications beforehand. They saw what I had said. They heard me when I said, we can't do it now. And they still work with me. And I decided preemptively, if a client is going to leave because I'm setting a healthy boundary for myself and my team, I don't know if I want to support that client. I want to support clients that have respect for other humans, that view us as an overall asset and not as like a robot where you poke some numbers and out spits an answer. So I want people to view us as collaborators and humans. And if they're not going to do that, maybe I don't want to work with them. And it's easy to say, and it's hard to do when you see the numbers and you're struggling. And there are periods like that for every business. But the folks who are able to feel more comfort and security in that approach, they end up with better clients. And they're happier in their jobs as a result. And those clients, because they really enjoy working with you, they go tell their friends and their network. So you end up I think you just end up better off. But it's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy. And I learned by doing it really wrong at first. Okay. Yeah. And then, and then I had to figure out, okay, well, how do I learn from that and do better next time?
So the courage to be able to do that, did that come from experience or the financial stability that your business got through the years, or learning from mistakes?
I think I had been concerned about bringing in enough client work, and that just hadn't been a problem up until that point. I was drowning in work, and that's why I needed help, and I couldn't just take the time off. I had too many things going on that I was too into. So I had to do it. And then, I also think you have to decide the parameters. It's so hard, right? Because there's this thing in the back of my mind, even that's like, if you're too nice to yourself, you'll just like deflate into a marshmallow and like not do anything, right? There's this desire to be kind of tough with ourselves because we don't trust that if we're kind to ourselves, that we will still do work, that we will still be productive and get things done. And the reality is the only people who really think that way are people that are over optimizing on the being tough and like have unrealistic expectations for themselves. Like people who do sit around all day not doing anything, they don't have these concerns.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have these concerns, the likelihood is that if you loosen your grip a little, it's very unlikely things are just going to crumble away into nothing, and much more likely that you're just going to get a firmer grasp on it overall. You know, like trying to hold on to sands with a grip versus like a loose cupped hand. You hold a lot more sand that way. So it's this figuring out how to identify your own boundaries. And I really do think it comes back to like listening to yourself, which is a skill we probably all unlearned and need to relearn.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah. I have kids, so I see them. They are really in tune with what they want.
Oh,
They
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
you know, there's no we have to get back to that somehow.
Yeah. So how did you sort of fight your imposter syndrome? Like that is also something that is, I mean, it ties down to all of the things that you were saying right now, but how did you kind of fight the imposter syndrome? And I've also noticed that imposter syndrome is always associated with women generally. So
here's what I'll say. I think that a lot of people have imposter syndrome, but it's probably not as talked about among men or not as accepted. Here's the thing that I heard about imposter syndrome that I want to put out there is that the reason it's there is not because we are like underestimating our own value, although that is true. It's there because we keep coming up against situations where other people are underestimating our value. And we have to assess the world based on our inputs. So if we keep getting you're worse, you're less than, you're not as valuable, you keep getting that message, how are you going to not feel like that there's some truth to that? You'd have to be delusional not to think there's something there. And yet, in particular, the imposter syndrome, the people have all sorts of advice about it. My advice is really specific, which was that I actually realized that I could learn so much from my bad managers about what not to do. So I'd be like, what would that guy do? Let's do exactly the opposite of what he would do. And it actually really worked. It really helped.
That's an interesting approach.
And the other thing is people with imposter syndrome think that you're supposed to be perfect get-go. Nobody's perfect from the get-go. But if you're willing to take feedback, really honestly solicit it in a way that makes people feel comfortable that there's not going to be some sort of repercussion and act on it, then you get more of that feedback and you act on it more and you fix the imposter syndrome by just becoming better at whatever it is that's causing imposter syndrome, right? If you see yourself improving day to day in the way that you communicate with people, in the way that you manage, in the way that you delegate, you don't have imposter syndrome anymore. So to me, that was my solution was, number one, there are data points even when you've had bad examples. And number two, you can work on these things so that, and that's a benefit to everybody that you're working on these things. Would you feel like you need to work so hard on some of these areas if you didn't have imposter syndrome? Maybe not. But you know what? Maybe it makes you an amazing fill in the blank about what's giving you imposter syndrome. For me, manager. I do think I'm a way better manager than I was because I was nervous about it and I was constantly trying to improve and get feedback and do a better job.
That approach is something that I've never thought of. Like you always think like to learn from, a good manager, but
the good manager thing. Well, I had to figure out something because I had to figure out I had to manage people. I was like, well, what can I learn from my prior experiences?
I mean, that's the people that you had in front of you, right? Like, so you have to do something with what you were given. Make
lemonade, these lemony managers. But what's funny is that it's also sometimes helpful to realize the areas in which you don't have imposter syndrome. And actually, it sounds like hubris, but I had been doing that work for 13 years. I had been thrown in the deep end when I started. There at the firm I was at, they had hired a bunch of partners and no associates. So it's like me and this other corporate associate, the other guy burned out completely, just like left. And it was just me. And so I I worked a ton. I learned a ton. It was not sustainable. I got burned out eventually as well. And I left. But I never had that much imposter syndrome about my ability to practice law, startup law really well. I had hubris, if anything, about that. But having that made me feel more comfortable saying, okay, yeah. And then there are areas where there's no proven experience where I've been an amazing manager or even seen one. So, but then I can work on that because I know there's other areas I'm doing great.
Yeah. What advice would you have? You've been working with so many founders and being a lawyer. What advice would you have for someone who wants to be a lawyer, and second, someone who wants to be a founder?
Okay. So for somebody who wants to be a lawyer, my advice is really explore it. I stumbled into this. I lucked out. I ended up finding a practice area that really worked for me, that really excited me, but it took some stabbing around in the dark, poorly, I might add, like with summer. But if you are mindful about it, and if you explore these areas, you talk to people who actually do it, you look at how their day-to-day is, what do they enjoy, what do they dislike, and kind of match up your skills and your preferences to that, you have such a better chance of making a career that makes sense, because it is not just a monetary investment, but a time investment. 3 years of extra schooling where you're not making any money, you're paying money, is significant. And so I just want people to really, I mean, it worked out for me, but I lucked out in many ways. And, I always was casting about for like, let me try this, let me try that, let me ask this person, let me ask that person. But if you were more careful and deliberate in your attempts to figure out what makes sense for you, I think you would have a good outcome. But it's a big investment. So I do encourage people to test it out, talk to people, lawyers are sometimes really excited to talk about their practice and help young aspiring future lawyers or just students. And there are often programs in your school where you can shadow someone for a day or do things like this. I think all of that information is so valuable. And then, there are so many things you can do with the law degree, but just getting a law degree without really having an idea of what's next it's just stalling. So use that time wisely. If you are going to get a degree, really figure out what's going to work in the long run. And know too that you can pivot. You can transition from litigation to transactional, or from private to government, or vice versa. And people do this all during their careers. But it's kind of like, wouldn't you rather use that time for something you're actually interested in rather than kind of going here and there and praying, you know what I mean? And like suffering through something that really does not fit your interest at all, or ultimately learning, actually, none of this works for me. And I wish I hadn't spent all that time and money getting a law degree. I'm not using it at all.
Yeah.
So that's my advice on that. For founders, I have different advice, which is, if you're interested in it, start doing it. My situation where I started this firm pretty late, and after hearing a lot of signals from my own self that what I was doing, although on paper it looked great, I was partner of this really successful, up and coming, firm that was getting bigger and bigger, but it wasn't satisfying to me. And I, went through this whole period where I was like, do I need to be teaching? Do I need to be in law anymore? Like all of these crazy ideas, when actually there's so many things I liked about my practice, but I needed more of a why. I needed more of a meaning and a mission. But what I would say to founders is just start working on it. Once you start working on your project or your question or your problem, and you see how it feels to be working on it, is it intrinsically rewarding to be working on it? If you find that, I think you find something you could start as your own business. I mean, you have to identify product market fit. Will people pay for the solution? All of the things we have to do in capitalism. But at the same time, if you already enjoy working on the problem, that's like 90% of the challenge in any day, right? So my advice to founders is like, do it somehow on your spare time, in your non-existent spare time, make some time. And if it's really interesting and compelling, it's something that can lead you to the right answer. It's part of that whole like listening to yourself and using yourself as your own guide is my advice. And then once you decide you really want to get something started, then it's like figure out the team, figure out the resources, figure out the specialists that you need, figure out how much you can do on your own and how much it is not efficient for you to do on your own because it's not a good use of your time or your funds.
So, I mean, you said that you battled like deciding whether you wanted to be a teacher and because it was not satisfying you.
Yeah, I applied to become a clinical professor at used to be called Hastings. Now it's like SF Law. And I didn't know. I was dissatisfied, even though on paper it all looked right.
Yeah.
And then I realized this gap in access. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's that. Then it struck me. And I was like, well, I can't not do this. So that's
So did you quit immediately and then just, or did you like you said, the product market fit? Did you actually like start talking to your clients?
No. Well, I mean, I just made the decision to leave. I did talk to the clients that fit my mission and I invited them to come with me. And then I just started working. And, starting at your own law firm seems very daunting, but like paperwork wise, I'm a lawyer.
You're a lawyer,
formation lawyer. It wasn't that bad. It was more just feeling worried about the unknowns, but as a lawyer, I felt more prepared than your average founder around those. And I knew who I could ask if I didn't know. And from then it just kept going on its own. And now we're a team of 10. It's 9 women and 1 man who unapologetically calls himself the diversity hire, which I truly do enjoy. I really appreciate it. And they all love the mission of the firm, and they all just continually express their gratitude to be working in this mission and with the other people that really care about it and with the clients that we have. I did it for semi-altruistic reasons because I just was like, this needs to exist in the world. And then I've been the biggest recipient of the benefits because I'm just so happy in my day-to-day compared to like, how many lawyers do you know are like, I love what I do. I love what I do.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
What legacy would you like to leave with Venturous?
I mean, I don't want to create like a huge, gigantic firm because I don't think that those are really good at addressing the need that we address. So it's not a size thing, but I think I want to create a resource that does a small bit to address the systemic imbalance in the system and overcorrect for favoring those clients in a way by giving them access to a resource that is really efficient, that cares more about their success than we do about our own bottom line, that advises in a really thoughtful, forward-thinking way. I've worked with Uber, Lyft, TaskRabbit, all the way through to acquisition. Like I've had a ton of experience, Felice's, Floodgate, Rakuten, Hustle Funder, current clients. Like I have a ton of experience. And my goal with this firm is to direct, like laser focus all of those skills and experiences and expertise towards the people who I want to see more of in tech. I want to see them amplified. I want to see them successful. I want to see them to be a voice of reason. We clearly need that so bad right now. And so just being able to do my small part in that way to equalize and amplify those voices and give them a strong, stable foundation from which to excel. That's what it's all about.
That is extremely powerful.
Thank you.
What stage should a founder come to a legal firm?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I will say this, hot tip. There's one formation platform out there where I don't have to fix anything. It's not Stripe. It's not Gust. It's definitely not LegalZoom. It's called Clerky, Clerky. Most Y Combinator companies have been founded on this. The founders actually used to work at the firm I started out working at. And, it's the only one. And so there are resources out there that allow you to delay. And then the fact that people can raise on safes, that's just a form out there. But there are 2 things I'll mention. One is that if founders raise multiple rounds of post-money safes, they don't realize, but after the first round, every other round only dilutes the founders. It doesn't dilute the investors. And so people who have no legal advice or who are working with a big firm that's too busy to give them this advice, they raise multiple safe rounds. They don't realize they end up getting super diluted once everything converts in their priced round. But I do think you could start a company and even raise money on safes without a lawyer. I think it's really hard to have a product and users without having a lawyer involved. I just think that commercial arrangement will probably need to be negotiated. There are a lot of, just basic belt and suspenders you need to have in place to protect the company. I think that is true. But I would tell folks who are starting a startup, if they plan to raise angel or VC funding at any point, use Clerky, do it sooner, because actually, if you hold your shares for 5 years, in most circumstances, it's subject to qualified small business stock treatment on the tax side, and that means no federal taxes for up to $10 million of gain. And so if you wait 2 years to start and then you sell in 5 years, well, if you had just formed the company to begin with, you might be getting this really good tax benefit. So I do think that folks can survive without a lawyer on the corporate side for a little bit longer than they used to be able to. But I do think it's tough to be in negotiations with a client or something without someone who understands the stuff. And look, you can become an expert at the stuff. I don't think it's probably the best use of your time if that wasn't your calling in life. You can find somebody who has that expertise and that you trust, and you build a relationship with them. And that pays so many dividends over the lifetime of the business. And so really just trying to find that real, those early, accountants, somebody to help you with taxes. These folks they can be the difference between the company making it and not. And your ability to rely on these people to outsource the part of your brain that's constantly freaking out about legal at all times, like a broken smoke detector, that's so powerful because it unlocks so much capacity for you if you really give it to someone you trust. So, I'd say take your time finding the good legal counsel, but then before you need it for commercial, probably find one. And then, make sure that there's somebody who can be with you for the long run and is in it for the long run.
How much money should they probably be allocating in the initial stages for legal reasons?
Great question. I think it depends on where you are a little bit, but I think the formation stuff can be done for between like $1,000 or $2,000 if you use one of these platforms and just use a lawyer enough to like check things and make securities filings and the basic stuff. For like safe financings, clients can do that largely themselves. Again, the lawyers probably will need to be involved to like get a board consent together or confirm securities exemption filings. And, maybe if there's a weird side letter, they can help negotiate that as well. You should not just sign a side letter without understanding what it means, guys. Please get a lawyer, even if it's just for this one project. And those can be done, that's like $3,000 or something like that. It's when you get to like the commercial agreements. And again, you can self-help in the beginning. If you're not taking money and taking people's personal health information and things like that, there's probably limited risk. And you can put something together, but it doesn't, the longer you wait to do that, the more you incur what I would call legal debt, which is similar to technical debt. It's the same concept. You're just pushing the can down the road, and then it's going to be much more painful to fix later. But sometimes you have to do that because you have limited bandwidth and limited resources, and I get that. But I think once you get to commercial, that really becomes more bespoke. And then, of course, a priced round is pretty expensive. It takes can take 4 weeks. Can cost tens of thousands of dollars. And then you have to pay the lead counsel's legal fees, which is dumb. I'm out here on record saying I hate it, and yet it is the standard. And so that is a much more involved situation. And I've definitely had people come to me with like a term sheet in hand and been like, help me. But if they had come to me a week before, I could save them so much money and time by getting everything in place in advance and fixing everything before we head into the financing. So I do think getting counsel involved at the right time is really important. And there are things that also come up. People have co-founder disputes. They have to terminate employees. There are things that you don't expect. So you do really want to reserve a little bit extra. You want to issue new equity to somebody coming in. You may not think, oh, that's actually a legal process. These all kind of factor in.
That is extremely helpful. And I think those are like practical guide that people actually miss out, especially when they're starting out.
Yeah.
So to end, we always end with one of your favorite quotes and a favorite book that really helped you.
Oh, geez. My favorite quote is, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind" by Gandhi.
Ooh.
I have this vengeful side, and I have to like tell myself, this is not going to help, man. You got to figure out what your goal is and act towards that instead of just letting your emotions, rule the day. And for a book, I have a book that I want to recommend to the group, which is Venture Deals by Brad Feld. It's one of the few books about startup that actually I think is informational and helpful instead of just capitalizing on people's ignorance about the subject, and is pretty useful. The other thing I'll mention is, especially for anyone who's interested in investing, there's one of my clients is Hustle Fund, and Elizabeth Yin is like a thought leader in the early investing startup space. She started her career with 3 $1,000 checks. So it's very like her story is very impressive and accessible in a lot of ways. And she has really good content. And so does the whole Hustle Fund team out there. So I'll plug them. And then in terms of a book for myself, I recently read Man's Search for Meaning, which is super depressing. But also the concept is that if you are in control of how you think about things, and especially in this political climate, I feel like I've been needing some control. And the reality is we can say that the environment is causing me to feel or think a certain way, but we are in charge of how we think about something. And if we can get control over that, we have so much more capacity, and it's a very expansive way of thinking about things. So I think that's a good one too.
I definitely will check that out. And on that powerful note, thank you so much, Aravinda. It was so nice chatting with you and just learning so much. You gave such tangible advice. Like it was just so good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You asked such great questions and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Sai.
That was Aravinda. What stood out to me most from this conversation was something Aravinda said near the end. She realized that the thing she was searching for wasn't a new career, a big title, or another accomplishment. It was purpose. And once she found a mission that aligned with her values, expanding access, creating representation, and helping founders who might otherwise be overlooked, everything changed. That's a lesson that extends far beyond law, startups, and entrepreneurship. Sometimes the next chapter isn't about becoming more successful, it's about becoming more aligned with who you are. Aravinda reminds us that building something meaningful often starts by listening to the voice we've spent years ignoring. The one that tells us what matters, what feels right, and what we are uniquely positioned to contribute. And that comes from listening to ourselves and practicing to really listen to who you are. If you've really enjoyed this conversation, please like, share, subscribe to this channel, and let's build this community together. I promise you, I will keep bringing more and more amazing guests like Aravinda. And as usual, be bold, be real, and be anomalous.